Well, hello everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to lunch. Welcome everybody on the live stream. I'm Elizabeth Childs and thrilled that you're here today. I get to have a handheld mic today, which is very exciting. I won't bring it to song, I promise. I'm going to spend some time just over the next hour talking a little about some work that colleagues and I are doing through the EI Lab, which is at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. So you'll see some of the work we're doing around fully online community models. But more importantly, we really want you to be actively engaged. So there's going to be some work you get to do. I'll front end this with a bit of an explanation of the work we're doing, and then really invite you. It is a work in progress, some of the self-assessment tools we're building. So I'll show you some that are built, and then I'll get you to actually contribute to the building of one in particular. So that's generally the flow. But before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional lands on which we stand. And we've had the pleasure of welcoming folks to the School of Education and Technology programs for their residency, and taking time for folks that are away to really acknowledge the lands that Royal Roads physically sits on. And for me, what's so special about these lands is the ability and the gratitude we have to work and live and learn and play on these lands that have been so well stewarded and cared for generations. And it really is a privilege to be here to do that. It also is an invitation, and this is how I take up the welcome in the work that I do in virtual spaces, is an invitation for us to consider how we co-create these virtual spaces and what type of acknowledgement we give to those spaces and how they're created, and how we leave them for other generations. So something to consider as we bridge that gap between the physical setting and the virtual environment. So today's adventure, we're going to do a little bit of a description of context for those of you who might not be familiar with how some of the programs work, both at UOIT, where the EI Lab is located, as well as Royal Roads. Talk a little bit of the theoretical underpinnings. I promise it's lunchtime, you're eating. I'll try not to put you to sleep with too much theory, but we're going to take a look at that and the general competency and use framework as well that underpins some of the work we're doing. Then we'll take a look at the fully online learning community model and describe it a bit for you before we get into some small group work. And so you'll have time about, I think, at the point when the food has hit your stomach and you're ready to fall asleep, I'll get you up and at flip charts and hopefully contributing to the conversation. So rest assured you can just sit still for now. There's no panic. Then we'll take it for a test drive. I'd like to show you a few of the other self-assessment tools that are in development and have been developed through the EI Lab, and then leave you with some resources. Before we start the adventure, is there anyone brave enough to comment on whether or not they've been involved in a fully online community? Silence. Brandon?
Yes, I have, through the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. It was a unique experience with both synchronous and asynchronous aspects to it.
Awesome, thank you. I promise he's not a plant. Often when we talk about fully online communities, this is the dinner party conversation that I have all the time. What do you do? Oh, well, I work in fully online learning communities. And everyone's face sort of drops. And you often get people say, oh, that's interesting. Or people say, what would you do there? Is it dark? Don't people like things? Like, you're online all the time? How do you get to know people? Oh, you must be bullied. And there's all kinds of perspectives. It's true story, that people have about working and living and being in these spaces. And so I'm hoping that some of what you'll see today helps to dispel some of the myths, perhaps. I honestly did not get a black eye being in an online learning community. I promise you, this was from my bicycle. So just to get us started, this is a short little, it's called a research short that we did through a grant at Royal Roads. And it's just a quick little video clip attempting to sort of orient you to the work that we're doing. So I'll just play it now with my fingers crossed that it works.
Being in communities online is something that many of us do in our daily lives, whether it is a group that connects local residents to community markets, a group that supports new parents on their journey into parenthood, or a group that connects craft food enthusiasts to their local providers. Online communities are places that we connect with others around something we have in common. In higher education, the concept of online communities for learning is increasingly being explored as more institutions move to offer online courses or programs. The field and practice of distance education has a rich and storied history of fostering connections with learners at a distance, whether it is through mail, phone, television, radio, and more recently, online delivery. However, for many, it is difficult to imagine being part of an online learning community in their formal post-secondary education experience. The fully online learning community model, or FOLC, is used to conceptualize, design, and research collaborative online learning in higher education. The aim of the model is to inform the design of digital learning environments and communities. In a world that continues to equate learning with memorization and testing, the FOLC model takes the position that deep and meaningful learning occurs at the intersection of two spheres that are immersed within a digital space. These two spheres are the social sphere, involving social presence, and the cognitive sphere, involving cognitive presence. Social presence is defined as the co-creation of a collegial environment that invites and supports learners in sharing their ideas freely and without fear. In this model, all members of the class, students, instructors, teaching assistants, are considered learners, each possessing varied and valid experiences, perceptions, and responsibilities. The result is a form of collaborative learning in which all parties work jointly towards solutions, and decisions are reached through social negotiation. This approach allows for differing and possibly conflicting views to be used in the development of new, complex, and previously unimagined solutions and understandings. Learners in FOLC-based environments are encouraged to adopt the position of a critical friend with their colleagues and actively seek out constructive feedback to improve the quality of their thinking. The FOLC-based learning communities that are created happen within digital spaces and places both in real time and asynchronously. In FOLC environments, problem identification, problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, and negotiation are among some of the skills and abilities required as learners interact with each other to solve real-world problems. In addition, the FOLC model's focus on inquiry-based activities, centralized control, and community orientation fosters the development of transformative and emancipatory learning as conceptualized by human rights education and social justice education. It does so by creating an environment that promotes a sense of intellectual and social safety, openness, and trust. This environment encourages the sharing of emotions as preparation for critical reflection and facilitates the exploration of divergent perspectives. Additionally, it promotes each community member's sense of autonomy, engagement, and collaboration through processes involving constructive feedback, self-assessment, and self-dialogue. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked this video, please share it with your friends, colleagues, and students.
Gotta get this back going. Here we go. So that was created to give people a sense of a very theoretical paper that was written. So there is some theory built in there, but hopefully it gave you a bit of an overview of what we're talking about and a way to connect it to what you do in your day-to-day. At the core of this, the community of inquiry model, which the FOLC draws heavily on, is the humanness, the actual humanity behind the screen, across the screen. So I just, before I jump into some of the theory, for those of you who are at Royal Roads, or if you're on the live stream, you've been part of a Royal Roads experience, I think you'll understand and resonate with the humanness factor, right? It's very much around connecting and learning from and with each other. At UOIT in the Bachelor of Educational Studies program, there is also a synchronous component that is more heavily used than perhaps we do here at Royal Roads to really create and solidify those connections that are made in the inquiry-based and problem-based learning model there. So those two programs, those two institutions, have very similar beliefs around learning environments, participation in those environments. I'm going to talk just a little bit about where that teacher role is, because you may have seen in those circles that smashed together, there wasn't one that said teacher. So this is a really nice, messy slide of all of the different theoretical models that weigh in on the FOLC. So you can see what I was speaking about there in English, in English and in educational jargon. Social constructivist learning, there's problem-based learning, there's the authentic assessment activities. Somewhere in here, I think I have a little laser. Well, maybe not. Oh yeah, it's over there. It draws heavily on Moore's concept of transactional distance, and really how can we find ways to minimize the distance that can be created in these spaces when we're moving between virtual and physical co-located spaces. The problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning approaches are evidenced in both of the programs and also in the model, in that experiential notion of having to experience and co-create these learning spaces. And of course, I mentioned the communities of practice and the community of inquiry model by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer, which the FOLC draws heavily on. To the other extent, we've got some teaching and learning paradigms and the Three Worlds epistemological model. So for those of you in the Mallet program right now who are looking for theoretical frameworks, you might want to pull some from this slide, because there are some listed there. It also is informed by this work by François Desjardins and the different competencies and relationships between the technical, jumping ahead, there we go. The technical order, social, informational, and epistemological. So you can see in the table to the right of the slide, there's a little bit of a description about what each of these mean. I'm not going to go through them in a lot of detail because I really would like to get you to be able to input to this model, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the frameworks. And Francois's writing, there's quite an extensive body of work around here. One of the tools I will show you later has evolved from this work, and it's around competency and frequency of use in digital spaces. And so it's a self-assessment tool that you can dive into as well. So the community of inquiry model, we have said, informs the FOLC. And in the community of inquiry model, does anybody know what the presences are in community of inquiry? Monster presence. No, I'm kidding. No monsters.
Social, cognitive, and teaching.
Social, cognitive, and teaching. Thank you, Sophia. So you'll see that there's some similarities here with the FOLC. So we have the social presence, and that space that's created by the actual co-creation, exchange, social constructivist approach to learning. We have the cognitive piece, which is that heavy thinking piece where you're really knitting together the content, the cognitive intersections. And then we have no teaching presence. And so what you may have seen in that little short animated video clip is a reference to the democratization and the leveling. So in the FOLC model, that notion of teacher presence is shared throughout the learning environment. So it is a co-created space. The learner, the TA, in the UOIT, they have teaching assistants in their program as well. So the learner, the TA, the instructor, the facilitator, there is not a hierarchy of you're the teacher. We are all the teacher. And you will wear that role in different ways and in different times throughout the learning environment. And so right in the intersection is this notion of collaborative learning. And that is where we really see the distribution of that formally a teaching presence role. It is taken up by all within the community. And in some of our work with colleagues in the Ukraine and Trinidad and Tobago and other places, it is that the democratization that is built into this model that has really resonated with them in their work as they try to take up online communities. The other piece that's here is this digital space piece. because, as the name would suggest, fully online, it's occurring in this digital space. The digital space may be a variety of things. The digital space may be a learning management system. It may not. It may be social media spaces. It may be other spaces. But it has that digital component to it. Let's see. Oh, this little part here. See, I know there's always stuff on this slide. This piece over here gives you a little sense of some of the divergences from the community of inquiry model that the FOLC takes up. So here where it says subsumes teaching presence into the two, that's what I was speaking about earlier around this shared. And the other piece is the context. And because we started with acknowledgement of the land and the place and the context of Royal Roads, in the FOLC, this digital space as a contextual dimension is really critical, which is for me what resonates and the connection I make between our traditional acknowledgement of lands and then thinking about that in this digital space. What does it mean to create these places and spaces, and how do we want to steward them as we go forward? So this is another, see, we like diagrams and pictures. Another one to help you, not at first blush, but maybe if you spent some time with it, help you see the intersection between some of the frameworks that have informed this work and how they play out in the different activities across the FOLC. So cognitive presence activities, you can see there, very much focused on that knowledge building, knowledge creation. Social presence activities, very much focused on the communication aspect, the co-creation, the need for dialogue as knowledge is created. And then different examples of collaborative learning activities that are taken up by the model. So, as I mentioned, we have this self-assessment tool. We're in the process of creating the full interface for the self-assessment tool, and the idea is that it's a readiness index. It's self-assessed, which brings with its own, biases and conditions and all those good things. But the intention is that people will be able to use the instrument to see areas of opportunity for growth, to see areas where they are excelling, that perhaps would match to an environment or a program that they're taking that requires fully online learning communities. We know from work by the Conference Board of Canada, the World Economic Forum, we know from the shift that's happening in higher ed that increasingly learning in an online space is going to be something that becomes part of the common experience. Already there are most people in high school in Canada are taking at least one online course as part of their high school experience. Is it a fully online learning online experience? Perhaps not. Perhaps it's blended, but they're using and starting to have to work in these ways. Employers are using lynda.com, they're using Udemy, they're using all kinds of different learning environments in online spaces. And so building your digital literacy in this space is going to become, if it has not already, some would argue it has, just part of what has to happen as being working in the 21st century. And so for us, that's really the important part around this, is to provide people with a sense of, okay, so what do I need to be successful here? And then an interpretation grid on what counts as success. Where can I get help? How can I extend it? What other opportunities are there for me to build skills in this area? So right now, you'll notice it says propositional definitions for the 4 components of the FOLC. And they're propositional because we've been presenting this since last fall. We presented at the World Conference of Online Learning. We presented at Networked Learning this spring at Ed Media, all in a workshop style to really invite people to challenge these, to address these, to add more into these, to find out what was resonating with them and what they felt actually didn't make sense or wasn't a fit. We have since, with all of that feedback, created a draft survey, which I'm going to share with you and get you to get into, hopefully. And we're really looking for your input and feedback. How can we make this self-assessment tool stronger? How can we make it more useful on the other end of things? So we're going to spend about 5 minutes now. I'm looking at the time. Okay, maybe 7. Folks that are on the live stream, feel free to, Samantha's monitoring the chat. If you want to go ahead and have a chat together on the live stream, that's perfect. And then Samantha will be your voice in the room. I'd like to, maybe we'll just get into some, you don't have to move tables, you might just gather. So we'll gather over there. You guys are a big group, you can handle it. We'll maybe gather this group here. And do you want to come and join in here, actually? Perfect. So we'll have 4 tables. And I'll just give you one of these to ponder. You've had maybe 20 minutes of an orientation to this. You've done no reading of any of the writing that we've done. So do not expect that this has to be, you know, a perfect master's comment on this work. In fact, it's better if it isn't, because the intention for these readiness tools is that they'll be used by everybody. We have people in industry that are already using a digital competency profiler. We have people in higher ed. So this is not just higher ed specific. So if I can get this table, as they come together, to take a look at the social presence definition. Does that definition, based on your whirlwind tour, I liked Teresa's comment yesterday, the zipline tour, I like that. The zipline tour of the FOLC, does that definition resonate with you? Is it too academic? Could it be toned down? Could it be strengthened? Could it be deepened? What kind of thoughts do you have about that definition? It then informs the survey questions, the self-assessment questions that will be asked. So the definitions are really key. And it's not often that we get the opportunity to get people involved in their creation. So I'm quite excited for this. There are flip charts here. If you want to sort of jot up some notes, please feel free to tell us what isn't working for you. Tell us what does work. Any questions that come up when you read that definition and think about it. So we're open to any and all. So I'll get this group to do the social presence over there. We'll maybe do cognitive presence here with the back table, and you can pick your flip chart. And let's do, this might work out nice. Let's do collaborative learning over with this group and a flip chart. And all you live stream folks, you get to do the digital space, because you are transactioning that distance right now. So if you can comment on the definitions on the digital space, that would be great. So let's take, I'll say 5 minutes. I'll tell you when it's 5 minutes. We'll see how we go. Sometimes it takes a minute to get your head in here. I understand. And your lunch has just hit bottom. So if you need to stand up, feel free. And I'll let you know when we're at 5 minutes.
That
that there's a
Or it's something about the diversity of thinking.
it's sort of not very,
It's something about when we're talking about cognitive presence, it's
well, just
like
to imply a greater,
ways of thinking.
or what implies greater?
Even with that, like they always say to me, I wish I could talk to you about language. There's concepts that we don't have. You know, my kids will say, what is your dad? They kind of don't get it, you know. Yeah, things like that, like they just.
There's a really great book on the
Yeah, well, you would.
and I did the first part of that
Give
with
this to another person.
Indigenous Ed project, and it's basically, and it's more, yeah, it's a way of knowing, not just being a learner, it's the way you are, and that encompasses being a learner.
Exactly. So what that gets at in cognitive presence is that this respect for truly diverse ways of approaching.
It's kind of like maybe I'm a creeper, like I'm on Facebook, but I never really understood my brain. That's part of the people, so maybe that's not responsible.
It's totally different for someone else. Yeah, and diversity not meaning like superficial, like I look different than they do because I'm not Caucasian. It's like really true, deep diversity of thought, of knowing, of these published. Yeah. Like they, I was talking about the importance of the land, and I said, I am the land. Like, you know what I mean? I go, oh God, you know, like my bones and everything, I am the land. Oh, okay, got it.
You know what, sorry, I was gonna say one of the things, in terms of looking at something that, I might have questions about, it's the statement about quantity, what's critical thinking.
It was interesting, she's talking with us.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. How often? Right.
How many times?
I could, yeah. How do you measure that?
And to that extent, even the quality of way, like, which is the function of information by that.
I think there's another word there that's not clear, which is defining. Doesn't it live on different levels?
Yeah, which was, yeah, depth would be a better
So
word.
basically saying,
Perhaps. Oh, it was fine.
yeah, so social presence is
Yeah. Yeah, instead of quality, depth.
more genuine interaction.
I know.
Yeah, it's a start.
Just you have more awareness to your perception, you have,
Nobody's talking about it. Okay.
Because I think
it's a mouthful
It's
for
like
sure.
collaborative problem solving or
I would probably,
structure meaning.
it's not like user friendly.
Really
It sort
honoring
of starts out
each
that way.
other's contributions. It's going to be collaborative.
Because what's the construction of meaning?
Like who's this for? If this is for master students, great. If it's for anyone else, I would say the language is.
Not just occurring, but actually doing.
Yeah, just qualifying what they mean by construction. I think construction of meaning is
Put it
the
down.
hard one. Qualify it.
Yeah, and to dovetail on that, it would also be, are we talking about collective? Like, is this something, are we together creating meaning, or am I creating meaning and you're creating meaning? Like,
Oh, you got it.
yes.
collaborative, Philip?
I'm happy you brought that up. Sounds like supposed to be in school.
Respect this morning, we did an exercise where we were talking about reflective writing at the top.
And we're likely,
What was the top universal value that
likely,
people was thinking about?
given where we're standing,
Your group,
we're saying.
goal, yeah, respect is too strong.
Very one-sided, though, like that degree of awareness is, yeah, or,
I think what you're doing is respecting those individual differences.
There's a lack of self-awareness.
And she was talking the long program as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I just need
aware of how you are impacting others.
Aware of self and other, yeah.
Maybe you want to write.
So folks, we'll take just another minute here, and I've asked the folks online to do a quick summary for us as well. So just one more minute, and if you could put it up on the flip charts, then I can do a summary read for everybody. Thank you.
Anyway, but they do want to get into digital learning. They need to get into online learning. And one of the things like Elena is registered in What's the environmental environmental sustainability worry about the online learning fully online. So everybody has been talking to her this evening and just sharing with her, you know, what today trying to quality work in her online learning. Brilliant, brilliant person. But she's really nervous about the fully online learning. The one that she's in, she hasn't been to, she's kind of like a little bit, she's got one more thing. I think she starts with September. Yeah, so and she did say they don't have it.
So I think we'll come back together now. I know the online environment live stream folks have reminded me that working in that space sometimes takes us a little more time because it is in real time, but it can be that back and forth of a discussion. So thank you for that reminder. We'll get you to go last. So I thought in the interests of time and because I really would like to show you some of the tools suite that has been developed, I'll just do a quick synopsis of what's on the flip charts so people on the live stream and others in the room can hear. So this was on the social definition. Questions around that notion of presentation of self. We've been talking in Mallet, we've got several different personas that many of our learners have already online. And so how would this definition align with someone who has multiple personas in this space? Some words around, you know, is it too jargony to talk about fidelity? Is interactive redundant, that sort of thing. Good questions around reading level and the target audience. So if this was just higher ed, would this fit? If it is going to industry or other sectors, do we need to do a pass in terms of readability? So really good feedback there, thank you. This notion of lack of self-awareness in this statement. Does anyone want to speak to that just a little bit? I have to give you the mic so the live stream can hear. I don't know who was.
Sorry. So when we read the first bit of the sentence, is a degree of awareness, feeling, perception, and reaction to another person in an interactive online setting. So, but what about that self-awareness and what we bring to it and what we present in our place in the community? That was kind of the concept there, just that it's in reaction to another person that within a statement.
Thank you for that. That's a really good thing for us to consider. And then adding acceptance before this notion of reaction. So some wordsmithing and some additions. Thank you very much for engaging in that. Our cognitive group, the big group, you guys got right into it. It's fantastic. Yes. So Indigenous populations may have or articulate different ways of knowing. So they may see these definitions very differently. And so how cross-cultural are these definitions and the need to run that through a cross-cultural lens? I think that's an excellent point. Thank you for that. I overheard the discussion, so there's on the live stream, just for you know, the next point is about quantity, the word quantity in cognitive presence as it's defined there. How often, how many times, what would count as quantity? What about quality, who's assessing quality, and are we actually getting into those granular distinctions that we may not want to in this model? So speaking of, research that does spend a lot of time just measuring quantity of discussion postings in an LMS. And by using those words, are we actually creating pathways to go down that track, and do we want to do that? Maybe using the word depth instead of quality. So that's excellent, something to consider. Need to quantify or qualify, what's meant by collaborative and collective. So in that definition that's currently there, what actually is the distinction between the two, or are there distinctions? And then respecting differences. By that, did you mean a way in the definition that people could see that differences were being respected? And back to the cultural piece. Okay, super, perfect, thank you. Thank you. You guys, this is fantastic. Roland, are you getting all this? One of my colleagues is up there. So now I'm making the live stream camera run around. Collaborative learning. So looking at the collaborative learning definition, the comments were around co-construction. And so does that actually appear? So right now it says is the construction, but do we need to have co-construction in there? Updated references, the reference seems very old. If we're going to keep this in a 1992 reference, would that evoke confidence is what I'm assuming it was meaning there. Yep. More plain language. Oh, you don't like the academic speak? I can't imagine. Fair enough. And then something to consider around group size. So right now it's really focused on this notion of small group, which also isn't defined. And so is group size important? And if so, does that need to be defined or explained more thoroughly? So perfect. Thank you very much for that. Our folks online, oh, it's up here. Okay. Co-create, there's lots of comments. So as I was summarizing, lots of comments about this notion of co-creative versus co-created. Co-creative is kind of an interesting flip on it, actually. Resources being shareable. I'm just scrolling up after. And those of you who are online, if I'm doing a horrible job, please just jump in the text and tell me to summarize in a different way. Right now, what I'm seeing in the chat is this notion of co-creative, co-create, communicative, and virtual environments. So a nice way to really expand this definition to allow it to inform that resources are shareable, that if you're going to be participating and using these digital spaces, people need to be able to find them and be able to get to them and not be hit by a firewall every time they do. And so I know in the UOIT program, one of the requirements is the learners can go out and do their inquiry and their experiential pieces in whatever software they choose. The only requirement is that others can find it and view it and get to it and see it. So by whatever means that happens. So I think that finding a way to incorporate that more strongly in here may be a helpful addition. Anything else from the folks online that I need to be adding here? So I am now looking at myself through the computer screen, and wow, this black eye is really black. Sorry. That was better when I didn't see that. Okay, let's see. There's some new comments. Okay. An emphasis on process, importance to add communicative. And then Roland's comment. So Roland, thank you for joining, is the primary researcher at the EI Lab. And so one of his comments, he was speaking with Tony Bates on this model, and one that he agrees with is the use of traditional structural elements such as an LMS are actually detrimental to innovation in a learning environment. So how can we, perhaps what that makes me think of is in this definition as it's created now, how do we get that notion of innovation in there? Because right now it may or may not be. It's left open to interpretation. And are we really going to privilege innovation over more traditional environments? And if so, why? So all of these types of questions. See, this is what's so fun about doing research. You get to ask all these questions and no answers. So we did some definitions. this is the survey. I appreciate that you may not have a device with you. So I invite you to grab it. It's hopefully not too long of a URL to remember. Samantha, I'll give you this back so maybe you can take me away from looking at myself and, and they can type it in. You're welcome to go in here and try out the draft survey. We really would encourage that. We would love it for you to go through. We're looking at comments as we refine this instrument. These comments have been really valuable. We'll be meeting as a team to go back and look over them, think about refining the definitions and how that plays into the survey questions that have come out of them. What I'd like to give you an opportunity to do is to see what the end might be for this type of an instrument, just so you can have sort of the end in mind. So this is the FOLCS and surveymonkey.com/R, RRU 2018 version. That's how you can find it. I'll come back to that. This is the Digital Competency Profiler. So originally it was called the General Technological Competence in Use. So it was based on Francois Desjardins' work, the GTCU. And it's something you can also go in and you can try for yourself. And it looks at competence with digital technologies using two scales, the frequency of use and the confidence of use. This is how we're defining competencies. And so it's taken from the UNESCO work on competencies that came out in 2017. So it's this notion of a range of abilities. Many are not just skills per se, but a combination of behaviors, of expertise, of know-how, of knowledge and habits. When you complete the profile, this is what you get. And so you'll get this Astor plot that you can see is allocated with the different colors to the different competencies. And you can see, you know, for example, in this blue is a social competency. If you mouse over your Astor plot, you'll actually get an exact number. And likewise for all of these. The thing that is, I think, has been quite powerful for how we've used it at Royal Roads is we've also been able to look at the relative index. So you can see across a group where people are falling. So we have had and invited our associate faculty, our faculty in Mallet, and our students in Mallet to take part in this, and then been able to look at, okay, in this cohort, for example, maybe they're already quite at this end of the spectrum on social, but perhaps they're, oh, I've lost my track of my colors. Perhaps on this one, they're further to this way. What can we do within our program to help provide support, strength, opportunities, or other areas for growth there? And the other piece that I didn't put the slide on, because I wasn't sure how much time we'd have, is there's a way, if you look at my little red dot and you drew a line straight down, you can have a target profile. So, for example, if you're working in the financial sector in a particular role, and you know for that role there are different skills, abilities, competencies required, digital competencies required across this, you can create a target for that role, and then people in that role can take the self-assessment and see where they are with respect to the target, which then helps them as they're developing their professional development and learning plans in that area. So coming out of this is an interpretation grid. So you would have this come back to you in a PDF, and then an interpretation grid saying, okay, so for the technological competency, here are some areas or resources you might want to dip into to broaden or deepen your experience in this space. And then if you've done the profile, the target profile, you can also see then where, based on that target, where they have sort of baselined and where they have gone to develop their resources in different areas as well. So this you can also jump in and try for yourself. That's just a sample one. Folks that are in the Mallet and Diplat program, you will be getting an invitation to participate if that's something you would choose to do. And it's been really fascinating to see the use across different settings for this tool and in different countries. So it's not just North American based. We're seeing it taken up and being used in a variety of settings. I mentioned the Ukraine, Trinidad and Tobago earlier. And so to see how they're using it and incorporating it. Athabasca is using it within their nursing program. And so we're really looking forward to working with them as we start to see some of the data come in. And then the last piece, just because there may be some in the room that are interested, the EI Lab is working on this notion of, and undertaking it right now actually, a Jello, which is not quite as jiggly as it sounds, but not too bad. It's the Global Educational Learning Observatory. And the idea is it's a network of academics and higher ed institutions that are supporting learning in hybrid contexts. And it's a bit of a think tank with specifics around these questions. It's composed of a series of self-assessment tools and toolkits. So along with the FOLCS that we're currently under development, there also is the DCP that you just saw. There's a cross-cultural awareness index. There's a design and make error index that are under development as well. And you can see more of them on the EI Lab site and see, how that's progressing over time. But the idea is really, and I think this is the important part, to move from problem solving to problem finding in this space, in the field of e-learning. So instead of counting around why aren't people engaging in discussion boards, let's move to the problem finding piece around what does engagement look like in a networked learning environment? What does engagement look like in a fully online learning community? Can we assume and layer on our expectations of the physical engagement into these spaces, or are there different affordances that these spaces have that we're not yet maximizing? So I think this is, I'm biased, but I think it's very interesting work. I think it's very encouraging work that's being done in this space. And for those of you who are at different post-secondary institutions, if you're at all interested, please don't hesitate to contact us and we can talk more about it. This is an example of the Jello dashboard. So of course, everybody starts with the demographics piece and then the different survey tools that your institution would like to have people participate in would log in here. You can start the survey. So this is the DCP. You might also have the FOLC in here. You might have another one as sort of a dashboard of different tools that you can go in, each of which generates a profile and the interpretation grid to go with it. So you're not left out there just wondering, great, I have a lovely, colorful circle. Now what do I do with it? So resources, more information. If you go to the eilab.ca, that's where you'll find the bulk of this work. That's much easier to remember than the rest of these URLs. But that will get you there. And then from there, you can dive into the different instruments. I really would encourage you. So there's my colleague Roland, who's on the live stream, and myself. Email us if you have any questions, if you'd like to follow up, if you can't remember the link to go in and try the survey, all of that good stuff. Please let us know. We really do. It's right in that critical point where there's an ability to go in and make some really interesting changes before it goes to the next iteration of design. So really looking forward to incorporating some of this feedback today and getting some of your feedback from the surveys. I'll just switch us back, if I can, to where the links are. There we go. So that'll give you right into the FOLCS. You'll see that it looks different from the DCP survey at this point. Not all of the beautification has happened. It's still in the development stage, but you'll be able to get in and start to work through it. And please just, there's place at the end of the survey as well as throughout to provide comments. So I'm going to stop there, uncharacteristically, for those who know me. There's 10 minutes left because I think you might have questions, and I'd love to have a conversation. So I will open it up to questions. I will bring you the mic so the folks on the live stream can hear the questions. But any comments, thoughts, observations, questions? Anybody need a cookie?
Sorry, I'm trying to always relate to my world of healthcare, so I'm just wondering if has this moved into that realm yet, where we're moving into virtual care and those kind of spaces where we're assessing, say, the competencies of healthcare practitioners working in digital environments yet?
So this hasn't, but it can. No, I mean, that's a quick answer, but absolutely. I mean, I think that's the interesting part, especially even just the digital competency profiler to test drive that in the healthcare environment, knowing that so much of this is moving to virtual care, virtual patients, holistic virtual care, which has a lot of systemic IT pieces that need to connect first. But from the human on the ground, like if we go back to what's at the core of this, and what's at the core of it is people, then absolutely, right? Being able to work in healthcare to develop a sense of, for each role, what is digital literacy in that role? What is digital competence in that role? And then use this as a way to have empower people to self-assess, to find out areas for growth and opportunity. In some conversations that we've had, and certainly in my work in K-12, it's challenging to be the one that says, yeah, this is not my strength. And so tools like this give people a little bit of confidence that, okay, it isn't my strength, but there's a step forward. There's a stepping stone. I can start to see a bit of a path. At least that's our intention. So absolutely. I mean, we can talk more about how we might do that, but I think there's huge space there for it. Other comments? Hey, I get to run.
Thanks. I have a question. So we talked about, or you showed us about doing the assessment and then coming up with the circle with the colors, and then being able to measure that against a particular identified position or position it was. So what happens in that gap? Like what's available in that gap, or are there practical suggestions or ideas or directions?
That's a really, really great question. It's so important, right? Because self-assessment instruments are tricky. Because you can self-assess and then you can be very disappointed with the results. Or you can create your own version of reality by going back and changing it. So what we've done with the DCP is we're working on right now an interpretation grid. So with the role profile and then your own measurement, self-assessment measurement, then you will be prompted with, and working with the organization, okay, if there is a gap, where can they go? What does the organization have internally that we can point them to? If the gap is here in technology, for example, technological competence, if the gap is there, what do you have institutionally, internally that we can point them to? So very customized. And what general pieces could we point them to? So the sort of the stock one will have the general pieces. You know, if you're looking for developing more strength in the cognitive piece, for example, epistemological, where can we point you generally? And then there's an opportunity to work with the organization to figure out what do they have in-house that we would be pointing people to, right? Which makes it, I think, much more meaningful for the people on the end. Yeah, you're welcome. Other questions, comments? Oh, Samantha.
It's actually Roland's responses to a couple of the questions. So he says that we are running the DCP at Athabasca Faculty of Health Disciplines. So there you go. That's that answer there. And he also says that the interpretation slash suggestion matrix will be available later this summer. And he's answered another question that came up online.
Thank you for being online, Roland.
If other institutions wanted to start using the DCP, how would they go about gaining access to it?
Another great question. Email Roland or myself, and we'll have a conversation. So that's what happened with Athabasca. We presented last fall. They came up afterwards and said, hey, we'd really like to try this. What's involved? We met online, a couple of virtual meetings, and we got them up and running. They're doing it as part of a research project, so we had to go through ethics on their end. We have ethics on our end through UOIT and Royal Roads. And so those kind of conversations would happen, and then we just get started. Thank you for that. Comments, questions? Oh, Ava.
Sorry, you're getting your workout here, going back and forth. And I missed the very beginning, so maybe you talked about this, but if you use it in the classroom, and you talked about pointing the person filling out the survey to different resources, but you mentioned somewhere in the cite sentence that you would also kind of go from that problem solving to problem finding and sort of adjusting. So if you used it for a class, would you see yourself then on the fly custom making or bringing in different topics on whatever the class result rather than the individual result was? Because a lot of it talks about so the individual knows where they have strength or deficiencies, and it's back to their responsibility though to do it rather than the group.
I think that's a really good question. Thank you for that, especially in the Royal Roads model, right? And I'm thinking specifically of when we come for residency, for example, but even online. And so, yes, I mean, I would, where I have used it before online is to get them to work through it and then come together and share the results. And they've done a little bit of reflection on next steps and thoughts. Then as a group, so we pair and share because, you know, it is, you're kind of revealing, right? So you have to gauge the temperature level and trust level that's been built. But they pair and share and brainstorm some other additional pieces. And then I've moved to taking it into the large group discussion around, okay, so what else? So that's where the customization comes in, right? Oh, and did you know at Royal Roads we have this and this that they can tap into, for example. The other place I've used it somewhat in that way is with some of our associate faculty. But it's been more of our one-on-one kind of conversations or informing some of our faculty engagement days, just without the large disclosure of everybody's, just sort of in the background informing some of that. But I think there's huge potential for that. I found it very rich to have the interpretive grid for the individual to reflect on and then bring that forward to talk about in a class setting. And then with the trust that's built in the community, it allows for those kind of conversations.
So, just curious, but further to that question, would you go so far as to say that curriculum becomes collaborative?
This is my bias, but I think curriculum should always be collaborative. There are some people that agree with me, and there are some people that don't, and there's some literature that agrees with me and some that doesn't. But yes, I think Brandon also, because he's been through a program that's been built on this model, could speak to that a little bit as well. But certainly in inquiry-based or experiential-based learning, the curriculum, that co-construction of the curriculum does become collaborative within the constraints that you have, right? So in some instances, in some contexts, the assessment can't be collaborative, or it can be collaborative to a point. And so that's an opportunity for growth, for testing of the model, for all of those good things. In other spaces, there's more flexibility in how you can navigate that co-created assessment piece, for example, or even co-created learning outcomes. So it really does, context does dictate to some extent how far you can stretch it. Yeah.
Do you have a round 2 survey to see the impact of what has happened and compare and contrast maybe at a later time?
Oh, Roland, did you hear that question? That's fantastic. So the question was, do you have a round 2 survey to see the impact, compare and contrast? So people that have been through the self-assessment and then taken up some of the suggestions in the implementation or interpretation grid, and then what happened as a result. So as far as I know, we don't yet. We're still working to get this one underway. But good food for thought. Thank you for that. So it is just before 1. Any comments or questions, Samantha, from the live stream folks?
No, just answers to other questions on live stream.
Okay, super. You are the final question.
It's really easy. We didn't get a chance to see the questions yet, and I will have a look at that when I go. You did mention something about if you weren't happy with the results, you could go back and re-event another reality. So does that mean the questions are more Likert type, where a person could decide, you know, if I don't want to come off this way, I'm going to move myself closer to that? Or is it more random type, you know, choose a word that describes social presence, and then depending on what is that like?
That's a really good question, Sophia. And I think the reason I went to that end on self-assessment is because that's one of the known biases and some would argue the flaws in self-assessment instruments. Right now it's set up as a sliding continuum. So you'll see when you go into the survey, you can move the slider to what degree you think reflects your experience. We've had some interesting feedback on that, both on the plus and ease of use and on some of the constraints that it's added. So it's something that we're really trying to figure out, what is the best way to minimize that self-assessment bias and allow for a true report that people could then take up and use in very positive ways. So thank you for validating. We need to continue to work on that. Well, thank you. I know it's just 1 o'clock. I don't want to keep people from the next thing. So I do want to say thank you so much. I really appreciate that a bunch of strangers jumped in and followed my adventure and got into some great feedback. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please go into the survey when and if you can. Add into it. We'd love to see some of your thoughts in there. And have a great afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone on the live stream.